So I am back once again with another of my boring videos specially made for you, and it deals with the physiology of the motor system, one of the most important topics of central nervous system physiology. I hope I shall be able to deliver it in a way that you will be able to understand the workings of the motor system. To begin with, let's have an overview of the components of the motor system. So what are the different components that make up the motor system? The most important and the highest center of motor control of the human body is obviously the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. From these motor areas, descending motor tracts ultimately reach the lower motor neurons to execute the motor activities. However, there are two other structures, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, which along with the motor areas of the cerebral cortex modulate the motor system. Ultimately, as I have said, the different spinal motor neurons and cranial nerve lower motor neurons are the final executioners of the motor activities of our body. So once again, there is a four-tier system of motor control. The highest is at the level of the cerebral cortex. The second tier is actually the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. These three all together modulate the descending motor tracts, and these descending motor tracts ultimately give an output through the spinal motor neurons or the cranial nerve lower motor neurons. This is the basic organization of the motor system of the human body. The motor cortex. The motor cortex is that region of the cerebral cortex which is involved in the planning, control and execution of voluntary movements. Now, classically, the motor cortex is identified as an area of the frontal lobe located in the precentral gyrus immediately in front of the central sulcus. Again, the motor cortex is classically identified as an area of the frontal lobe which is overlying the precentral gyrus and lies immediately in front of the central sulcus. It is again subdivided into three areas, namely the primary motor cortex, which corresponds to Brodmann area 4, the premotor area and supplementary motor area. These two together comprise the Brodmann area 6. Additionally, Brodmann areas 5 and 7 in the parietal cortex are considered part of the motor areas of the cortex. So again, the motor cortex is classically the area lying in front of the central sulcus and overlying the precentral gyrus, subdivided into three broad areas: the primary motor cortex, which is Brodmann area 4, and the premotor and supplementary motor areas, which are Brodmann area 6. Also, Brodmann areas 5 and 7 in the parietal cortex are considered as part of the motor system. The primary motor cortex. This area of the brain is the main contributor of the neural impulses that are generated for the control and execution of movements. These impulses pass down from the primary motor cortex to the spinal cord through the descending pathways. Now, just like the sensory cortex, which you have been taught in earlier class, this motor cortex also has mapping of the entire body in an upside down manner, with areas having more skillful functions like the fingers, thumb, tongue, larynx, etc. occupying larger areas compared to those areas which has less skillful activities like the trunk or the backside or the hips or the thighs. This is known as the motor homunculus. Just like the sensory homunculus, there is also a motor homunculus in which the body is represented upside down. Next, the premotor area. The premotor area lies in front of the primary motor cortex. It also has somatotopic mapping, that is a homunculus-like mapping, but it is not as precise as that of area 4. Actually, it has been found that the neurons arising from the premotor area make synapses with areas in the brain stem, mainly the vestibular nuclei and the cerebellar nuclei, which are involved with postural adjustment. And now it is hypothesized that this premotor area is more responsible for fixing the background posture during execution of a planned movement. So mainly the premotor area serves as the area that helps in fixing the background posture during execution of a planned movement. Say for example, you are going to play a cricket shot. So your hands are going to move towards the ball, but the legs need to be fixed to the ground for you to generate the power. That fixing of the background posture, that part is done by the premotor area. This is a rough pictorial depiction of the motor homunculus. As you can see, the body is represented upside down. The foot up to the waist is represented on the medial surface of the frontal lobe. Then the rest of the body, trunk, arms are occupying the superolateral surface. You can see the fingers and thumb have a much larger representation. The face also, the tongue and larynx has individual representations because they obviously perform much more fine controlled motor movements. The next area is the supplementary motor area. If you remember, both the supplementary motor area and premotor area were designated as Brodmann area 6 because anatomically they are continuous. The supplementary motor area occupies the medial surface of the frontal lobe, being bounded inferiorly by the cingulate sulcus, and on the superolateral surface it is continuous with the premotor area, or in other words, the supplementary motor area and the premotor area are lying just in front of the primary motor cortex. Now, what is the main action of this supplementary motor area? Its main action is to program the sequence of motor activities, means one after the other, which are involved in complex use of both upper limbs. Means when we are typing, or more appropriately when a surgeon is performing a laparoscopic surgery, the motor activities of both his upper limbs needs to be programmed properly in sequence. Those activities are controlled by the supplementary motor area. Next, the parietal cortical areas 5 and 7. These areas, though are not classically part of the motor system, are essentially association areas. Means there is sensory motor input integration in these areas. Hence, they are mainly involved in the execution of activities involving hand-eye coordination. Like you want to take a catch. So the ball is moving towards you. You take your hand up and catch the ball. That requires hand-eye coordination, and that is executed by these parietal cortical areas 5 and 7. This is a diagram trying to represent the superolateral and parietal areas of the cerebral hemisphere from one side. The structures of interest, you can see there's the central sulcus is shown, and in front of it 4 is written, that is the primary motor area. In front of the 4, 6 is written, that is the premotor cortex, and you can see areas 5 and 7 way behind. After 3, 1 and 2, that is the primary somatosensory cortex, you can see areas 5 and 7. Those are the somatosensory association cortex. The supplementary motor area cannot be shown here because it is lying on the medial surface. Other areas are also shown, like the primary auditory area is again shown in the area 41 and 42, and the auditory association area 22. Other areas of interest are also there. If you are interested, you can go through these numbers and try to find out what are these areas responsible for on your own as a part of your SDL. The next component of the motor system are the descending motor tracts, or simply the descending tracts. What are these descending tracts? These descending tracts are simply collections or bunches of axons whose cell bodies are located within the motor areas of the cerebral cortex, or few subcortical collection of cell bodies which ultimately have a role to play in modulating our motor activities. Again, what are these descending motor tracts? They are the axons of those neurons whose cell bodies are located in the motor areas of the cerebral cortex generally, or sometimes the cell bodies are located in few subcortical collection of gray matter, means cell bodies of neurons, which are linked with the motor system of our body. They have been classified classically as pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts. However, Presently, this classification is less used. More commonly, the descending motor tracts are nowadays classified as medial motor tracts and lateral motor tracts. Now the descending motor tracts, as I have already mentioned, are divided into medial and lateral motor tracts. What are these medial motor tracts? They are the anterior corticospinal tract, the reticulospinal tract, the vestibulospinal tract, and tectospinal tract. What is common in this name? The term spinal means wherever may be the origin of these tracts, they end at the level of the spinal cord. At different levels there are endings, but within the spinal cord only. They either start from the cerebral cortex or from the reticular formation of the midbrain or the vestibular nucleus of the pons or medulla, or sometimes the red nucleus. Wherever may be their origin, their termination is in the spinal cord at different levels. Now what is their main job? I am again telling you main. It does not mean their only job, but their main job. The central nervous system is immensely complex. Do not have the misconception that one tract is only for one job. There is considerable overlap, but the main job of different tracts are almost fixed. So what is the main job of these medial motor tracts? They are mainly concerned with control of axial and proximal limb muscles, and they function bilaterally. So axial means our body and proximal limbs means the girdles and the arm or thigh. So all the large anti-gravity muscles, they are controlled by the medial motor tracts. Obviously they will serve to maintain and regulate posture. We hardly do fine function with these parts of our body. Until and unless we are a break dancer, we hardly use our axial or proximal limb muscles to do fine jobs. They are mainly there to maintain our posture. So this maintenance of posture, the effector or the tract that controls these are the medial motor tracts. The second variety are the lateral motor tracts. The lateral motor tracts include the lateral corticospinal and rubrospinal tracts. What are they concerned with? They are concerned with control of fine movements carried out by distal limb muscles. Now the question is, why these tracts are called medial or lateral? Which one is medial, which one is lateral, and what is the standard from which they are termed as medial or lateral? The term medial or lateral refers to their position within the spinal cord. Wherever their origin is, they are descending through the different parts of the brain and ultimately entering the spinal cord, and they terminate at different levels. As they travel through the spinal cord, if they are positioned nearer to the midline, they are medial, and when they are positioned further away from the midline, they are lateral. It has been found that tracts which are situated laterally, namely the lateral corticospinal and rubrospinal, they have certain functions and they are called as lateral motor tracts, while the medial tracts, they have certain function and they are also positioned medially. This diagram shows a cross section of the spinal cord taken at the level of the cervical segments. In this diagram, you can see that the ascending tracts and the descending tracts have been marked out separately on two sides. Though they are not present only on one side, but for the sake of simplicity, they have been marked separately on two sides for you to be able to understand it better. See, on the left hand side of the diagram, the ascending tracts have been marked. They have already been dealt with in your classes of the sensory system. While on the right hand side of the diagram, you can see that different descending tracts have been marked. The lateral corticospinal tract and rubrospinal tract, as you can appreciate, are situated much more laterally and dorsally in the white matter of the spinal cord, while the anterior or ventral corticospinal tract, the tectospinal tract, the reticulospinal tracts, pontine and medullary, and lateral and medial vestibulospinal tracts are situated much medially and anteriorly within the white matter of the spinal cord. As you can recall, the functionality of the lateral tracts is more towards control of fine movement of distal limbs, while the medial tracts are more concerned with the maintenance of posture. The medial vestibulospinal tract is also known as the medial longitudinal fasciculus, though the details I will deal with later. Why is it called the medial longitudinal fasciculus and not the vestibulospinal tract? But for simplicity's sake, just remember the medial vestibulospinal tract is actually the medial longitudinal fasciculus. Another terminology which is appearing on the descending tracts side of the diagram is Lissoyer's tract. The details of it I will deal with when I will teach you the effects of injury to the spinal cord later during my lecture. I shall be stopping here for the moment. The rest part of the motor system I will discuss in my next few classes. Thank you.